Let's talk about cults. Oh yeah? I didn't mean you, but you're welcome to. Hey, what's up? I'm Allie, and welcome back to my channel. First and foremost, I need to start this video with a trigger warning. This video contains topics that may be triggering or uncomfortable for some. Viewer discretion is advised. Some of the topics mentioned are child abuse, pedophilia, rape, extreme religious groups, and incest. And though I will only be mentioning most of these topics in passing or briefly, just know that if any of that makes you uncomfortable to any degree, to please leave the video at any given time. So as you can tell, this is going to be a little bit more of a serious video for me. It didn't start out this way, but I don't really know why I didn't expect it to end this way. I think I, like many others, often joke about cults and being in cults and starting cults and, you know, blah, blah, blah. I think really they're just really fascinating to learn about. I enjoy true crime. I'm not like would necessarily consider myself a true crime junkie, so to say, in that like I'm not actively searching up different things that are happening. I just mostly hear about the big cases and I'm interested in learning about them. There's just a fascination with like the why aspect and the how aspect of a lot of true crime for me. It's not like a morbid fascination. It's just like I need to understand what happened and why it happened. And I think cults can be thrown into that because there's just so much where I feel like I hear about a cult and I think, how did someone get there? Like, this is obviously a cult. How did they get there? Like, how did they not see this? I think another fascination that I have is that cults do play a pretty big role in a lot of my favorite books. And especially dark academia, which is a genre that I really enjoy. Okay, so there is something about cults that I find fascinating and enjoy learning about. I should probably note here at some point that I'm not like a psychologist. I'm not a criminologist, whatever. I am not a professional in any means on any of these topics at all. So just throwing that out there that all opinions are my own and are just things that I've come across and things that I know, especially when it comes to cults. I haven't done like a deep dive into cults or anything like this. It's just a fascination that I have currently. And because 2 books were recently published and I wanted to read them with what little cult knowledge I have. So I guess I should probably introduce the actual premise of this video instead of just going on and on and on about why. Yeah, anyway, recently there was 2 recent releases that I was really intrigued by. One is a nonfiction and one is a fiction, but they both are about cults and they couldn't have come out at a better time to read them together. Also, seeing them together is super satisfying. These colors, the bright colors was an interesting choice because I think so many of us think dark when we think like crime and whatnot, but yeah. So basically this video is just going to be kind of discussing a little bit of what I know about cults and then reading and kind of reviewing based on that knowledge. So I thought the first step would to be read a nonfiction that is about a pretty infamous cult, and that is Sex Cult Nun, and this is about the Children of God cult, or what is now called, I believe, the Family International. And so I thought I would read a nonfiction. This is by the granddaughter of the founder of the Children of God cult. And then I thought I would then, with the new knowledge that I would have from this aspect, kind of judge how this might hurt would be against it, since this is a fiction about a cult, about 2 sisters. One is in a cult and one is not, and the other one goes to save her out of the cult, but other things are happening along the way. So I thought that I would kind of compare these and see just how well this had done in that aspect, and to let you know if it was, you know, as fascinating as one might think. That sounds bad. I feel like maybe I should give you just a little bit of background of what I know about cults. Relatively speaking, in the grand scheme of the world and whatnot, cult and cult knowledge is still relatively new. I don't think they were really researched until the 1930s is when people really started exploring what is a cult and how does a cult work. necessarily. Terminology of cult is not new, but just before it wasn't so negative, and it was more about people who followed a religion and were just like extra dedicated to it, so that they became, or a certain part of a religion or knowledge, and they kind of became a sect of whatnot, of like information about these things. I had to look up what the definition now means of a cult, and a cult is a social group that is defined by its unusual religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs, or its common interest in a particular personality, object, or goal. And I think my first exposure really, and I think this is probably anyone who was in the US, and because it has become so incredibly popular in media and in pop culture even, is the Charles Manson and the family. I think it is probably one of the most notorious cults. Again, that might be, you know, US based only. Secretive these cults are, and how all these like bad things can be happening, but you have hundreds and hundreds of people signing on to these things, and some of them know what's going on and just go along with it. And a lot of the times no one really knows how bad some of these things are happening inside these cults until years have gone by and a lot of the damage has already been done, especially to a lot of cult members who are born into the cult and not necessarily have chosen this life for themselves. When I was looking more into things after learning about the Manson cult, I came across actually the Children of God, and I do think this is another one, really popular one for anyone who doesn't know. I think if you know anything about cults, you have definitely heard about this group. It is a religious group, and it is mostly, I think, more mainstream because there are some celebrities who are actually part of this group at one time. I think Joaquin Phoenix and Rose McGowan have openly spoke about how they at one point were children in this group. I also think this was the first case that I had heard of. Now, I don't know if they were the originators of this process, but it was the first group I had ever heard of using flirty fishing or FFing. Even more fascinating is that this whole group was international. This wasn't just like a one area thing. This was an international group with so many of its members hiding in secret, and even its leaders' locations were kept secret from its own members. And just the fact that they were like all over the place. Definitely a more well-known cult. I'm not going to spend too much on the actual details of the cult because there's a lot. We'll talk about more in my actual review of the book. So yeah. So though, if you are interested in more information and backstory about the Family International, Fundy Fridays has done a video on this that actually shows like video clips of members and also some of the videos that they released for their members to watch and other articles and whatnot. So it was a pretty great kind of introduction. There is also, I believe, a documentary on Netflix, but I haven't seen it yet, so. Anyone who immediately sees the cover is like, oh my god, oh my god. Like, those are not words that you put together, you know, except for you do in this sense. When I saw that it was not only a former member of the cult, but it was actually the granddaughter of the cult leader, I had to read it. I had to know, because I think that just gives it a whole different perspective. I knew it was going to be a raw book. I mean, it's nonfiction. I knew it was going to be raw. I just thought it was going to be a more complex and entangled depiction of the cult, because this isn't just someone who maybe chose to go in it and then left at some point. This wasn't someone who was put into it by their parent. This was someone who's had generations of family members who believed in this and who had created this and had a whole different weight upon her shoulders because it was so ingrained into her family overall. So how did someone whose whole life, whose whole family was so ingrained in this, how did they get out? And how did they learn that what they were in was a cult? All right, let's talk about my actual thoughts and feelings on this book. First and foremost, I need to talk about some of the reviews, the other reviews that I saw about this book, because I went on just to see how other people were putting into words what they were thinking, because, like, honestly, it was a lot. But I have to say, my frustration with some of these reviews, there was so many who were thinking it was about nuns and finding it very misleading. I'm sorry, the subtext says, breaking away from the children of God, a wild, radical, religious cult. Anyone who picked this up and would have some insight into what the cult is about, and that they would know that this whole group is notorious for bending the Bible to their will, especially for sexual practices. A lot of them were upset that the attention was a title grab, and sure, yeah, it does a really great job at that. But I think that is literally the point of the title of a book, is that you want it to grip your reader's attention. And I don't think it's misleading at all, given that it is about Faith, who literally grew up in a sex cult and did not want to actually partake in the sexual activities. Hence, sex cult nun. Anyway, honestly horrified reading this book. I knew what it was going to touch on. Like, I had a general understanding this group was about and some of the controversies that had been in the news, but I didn't expect this book to delve into just how far these practices went, or I guess more appropriately, I didn't anticipate how bad these practices were. I think Faith does a really good job kind of balancing what her childhood was like and the family dynamic, especially because, like, it's very much from the mindset of her as a child. You're given the life that is presented to you by the adults around you, and so why would they question? They were secluded and isolated from the mainstream world and society. They looked down on them. They were actually told not to engage with them unless it was to get money from them, or put on performances to get money for them, unless they were spreading the word of God. She was also raised with other children in a very authoritative way and a very hardworking way, and they just don't seem to question that. Faith was incredibly lucky. It seemed to had a chance to have so many outside encounters, because the way that she described her childhood, it didn't seem like that would happen very often. It was kind of freak accidents that led her to having a lot of these outside kind of exposures, and that is what ultimately led to her leaving, which, just learning about the fact that, like, what if that one incident hadn't happened? Would she still be there, or would something else have come along? She often spoke of the child abuse and pedophilia that was running rampant throughout the group. The thing with Faith being in the group, as basically it was being founded, meant that there was a lot more sexual freedoms. There was a lot more sexual freedoms and policies than there are currently. They restrained a lot of them throughout the years, but basically in the beginning it was you spread the love of God by having sex. That is what the Bible said, according to Mo, who is David, who is the founder of the Children of God, and her grandfather. Basically, children were required to have sex with adults basically as soon as possible. Boys were much younger than girls. Girls started around 12 years of age, and they would be forced to sleep with adults, and that was apparently appropriate. They also were put onto schedules to sleep with other kids their age. And to them, this was just a way of life. To the children, I should say. And the thing is, children don't always know to question those things, especially if no one has ever really told them that they need to question those things and that a lot of those things are wrong. When they're being told that this is what God is requiring of them, how can they say no to that? I did like that as she became older and as things progressed, her opinions on the flirty fishing and the sex charts and the punishment for not being open to love. That was another thing. If you weren't open to love, you were punished for it. And her feelings become more complex, and that's where I think we also start to see a little bit of a breakaway moment. I will say this, it describes her experience at the time in pretty great detail. So be warned of that if you do go into this book. It is not something that she mentions in passing. There are details. She does spend the majority of the book looking at her childhood despite being with the cult for at least 20 years. I'm going to correlate that to being the most influential part of her life, obviously, is her childhood. That is the fundamental part of becoming an adult, is that you have to go through childhood first. I think it was also to express just how much this cult was bent on sex and control and pedophilia. One thing that I was expecting and I felt like we didn't get a lot of was, one of the main reasons I went into this book was Faith is part of like the main family. Not necessarily. I mean, as you read the book, you see more that that's not totally the case. Her feelings towards her family would be a lot more complex, and I think that it probably is, especially more so than she makes it appear. It's almost kind of presented in passing at times, or just like simple statements that I don't feel quite encompass, I'm sure, what she truly felt and or feels towards her family still. Little side note on Mo here. He basically created this to fulfill his own sexual desires. Maybe he, at the beginning, thought he was doing what was right because he broke from a religious group that he didn't think was doing exactly what it should be doing, and this was in the time of hippies, so to say, free love. And so he was kind of creating something and really targeting people that were kind of feeling lost during this time, who didn't really agree with the politics, didn't really agree with religion, and were looking for a sense of community during this time, and he offered that. However, things got shaky when he started taking on multiple wives, declaring other communities had to share wives, taking children to his bed, and encouraging incest even. Much of this was depicted in Mo letters and comics that he sent to families who were then told to burn them. So I feel like that probably should have been a red flag, but anyone who would then receive these letters at this point and these comics at this point would be so ingrained into the ideology that they wouldn't think anything else of it. Children were told to learn these sexual comics. These were very depicted comics, and often even depicted Mo's other child, who was a young boy, nude, sleeping with women. As the cult came under scrutiny from the news and the media, and as they had to keep hiding away from the world, and as other groups were being found, they did end up changing a lot of these kind of sanctioned things and really cut back on how much sex they were allowing people to have with children. Due to Mo's secretive location and also like just the paranoia of him, Faith never actually really meets her grandfather. So she expressed no true love for him. His granddaughter didn't give her really any special place in the cult, surprisingly, which was probably for the best, as I can only imagine what kind of attention that may have brought, especially learning some of the other things that happen with the people who do garner his attention. But yeah, her early years were mostly spent depicting her childhood and how often they moved. One of the probably perks of the cult is that the families move all over the world and have places to go pretty much in any major place that they wanted to go. There would be probably a family member there, and family group, I should say, who could take them in. And one of the characteristics of being a cult is seclusion. They weren't allowed to have real jobs. Any money that they got had to be put right back into the family. They were pushing children into singing and performing to get money. The women were pushed to do flirty fishing, which is having sex. Basically religious prostitution. They were forced to have sex with people in order to garner money or influence and to lure men into the cult. They were expected to cut ties with their family members. They were looked down upon. Anyone outside of this group was kind of frowned upon. They didn't get it. When the reckoning was going to come, they weren't going to be saved. A lot of them were fed stories that if they left, they would become homeless, they would become prostitutes, they would starve, they would become addicts, and of course, it wasn't necessarily because it happens to people who don't believe in what the children of God believe. It's because these people are so traumatized and so removed from society at this point that they didn't know what to do once they got out. Just had such hard troubles integrating back into society. I will say, as Faith grows older, she does branch off a little bit from the rest of her family in that she wants to seek an education outside of just like the little pamphlets and little schooling that they get within their family group. So that was the one difference that she had. My only complaint, and this has happened before in some other books that I've read that are kind of similar in this aspect, is that she oftentimes makes school and college seem too easy. I don't want to undermine the hard work that she no doubt put in to get to where she got. It just felt dismissive of a lot of other struggles, especially saying that, like, basically she went in, could memorize things, and then, like, was able to pass with flying colors, while she watched all the other kids who had money and all the chances and opportunity who weren't doing so well. And, I mean, you never know what's happening in someone else's life, and just because something might be easy for you, it could be very difficult for someone else, and I don't know, just felt very dismissive. University can be a challenge for a number of reasons, and maybe one of the reasons that she did so well is because it is very much a kind of scheduled system. It is repetitive, and so that might have been something that she was very good at because that was something that the family was very good at. The only other big critique of the book in and of itself is that her later years weren't as fleshed out as her childhood. And again, that might be because she was trying to show the influence and the impact of what this cult has on children. But that's about actually realizing that her family was in a cult and confronting her family members and how complex that must be. It just kind of felt skimmed and just kind of generalized and like, oh, I had these feelings and like moved on. I would think that if you are publishing a book that is specifically called Breaking Away from the Children of God cult, see more of the turmoil that occurred, at least glimpses of the turmoil that occurred when your world is turned upside down. I think that to me would have been the most interesting part of the story, instead of just like a god-awful history of what was happening. I think I would have really loved to see the struggle that happened after the fact. And I think, too, there's just so very little resources for those who are coming out of cults, because cults tend to be so life-altering and so traumatic and niche that it's hard for any one psychiatrist or therapy group to kind of nail it down. It's going to be incredibly unique to the people who are within that group. There's any one type of counseling that currently works for that, at least based on a lot of the interviews that I've seen from surviving cult members. It would be really difficult to move forward, so it would have been nice to have a book that shows the progress of kind of like the steps and how that happened in the thought process and like those moments of doubt. But I just thought a lot of that was just kind of skimmed. And maybe it's because the author doesn't want to delve into those thoughts, or maybe it's too complicated, or, I mean, there could be a variety of reasons of why the author chose not to. I just thought that if you're going to write a book about breaking out, I would like to see more about the emotional impact that that had long term. I thought this was a really great insight into a cult, especially great into how extreme a cult can be and how it can seem incredibly normal to those within it, and that it can just be a way of life without ever questioning it, and how much power others in the group can hold over someone else's life. Some complaints that it was dry, but I personally don't really want to read like flowery child abuse and pedophilia, so maybe that's just me, and I was fine with that. I think this is supposed to be a much more enlightening tale than an entertaining tale. Like, I don't think there was any parts where I was like, yeah, I really want to be entertained by this right now. This is someone's real trauma. This is not a fiction book. This is someone's real trauma. 4.5. It definitely had me rethinking things about the family, and then I was spending more time researching different aspects about the family, because again, this is just a Faith's story. Each person that is part of this is going to have a different kind of experience with what was happening with it and within it. So I was looking up more, and there are just so many more horrors that Faith doesn't even mention, and just how effed up so much of it is. I think Faith's last chapter of the book is the most powerful chapter of them all. About a lot of her revelations as an adult. It is about the wrongs the cult has done, and I would encourage anyone to read that part, and about her growth if you can, especially because like some of the quotes in this back part were just phenomenal. Read this part specifically. As I researched the statistics of abuse against children and women, both sexual and physical, I realized it's not just cults. It's a world culture, one that will not end until we're each absolutely clear on accurate boundaries, the code of conduct to make sure your freedoms don't violate others. So I thought that was a really great ending, and honestly, if you could even just listen to that last part to some extent, it is fantastic. There's so much that like I didn't touch on, and I do think that the book in and of itself, if you are interested, is absolutely worth a read. Very enlightening. I can't stop thinking about it, and I would love to know what's happening in the group today and how much of it still stands, considering Mo passed away, but Mama Maria is still leading. So I just know too much now, and I'm curious. I think going through the characteristics of what a cult is, I mean, obviously this one definitely exudes it. We have a charismatic leader. This was someone who had generally some good ideas at the beginning and then twisted them to be what he wanted, but he was very convincing and welcoming to the cause and really knew how to bring people in. The targeted group, again, just people looking for purpose and community during this time, and were just kind of down on their luck in some way, shape, or form. Unorthodox ideologies. I mean, this was very much a religious but also somewhat of a doomsday group. There are different categories of cults, and I would put this more so in religious group and then also in the doomsday, because the reckoning was supposed to come at some point. I don't know if it's still going. I don't know. Step-by-step path to fulfillment. Yes, because, you know, Mo was sending the Mo letters out and these comics out, basically saying, you know, if you do these, and these, and you can do this. He also had kind of like an inner circle type thing. So, like, if you were so good, you could become one of his wives or one of his inner circle, or figure out where he was, or be promoted to some other task within the family. So there was definitely different steps in order to reach kind of the highest of the members. And of course they were separatedness. I can't say that word. Anyway, they tend to be cut off from the rest of society, yes, and they move them around a good bit. And anyone who was kind of unruly or not settling well, they would get moved somewhere else and have to face different challenges. And then extreme commitment. I mean, they had to give up their families, their friend ties. They had to give extreme work. They had to give up all their money. They weren't allowed to have jobs. So, yeah, they had to offer their income, offer their bodies, whatever. Definitely hitting all the points there. Again, I'm not too sure. I don't know anything about what the family is currently doing. I don't know what all of their ideologies are like. So I can have no say on what they were like. What they are like. I can only say what they were like. Using a lot of those characteristics, I want to see what this might be like. Especially because I am someone who tends to think that cults tend to be religious, but looking a little bit more into them, that isn't necessarily true. I mean, they can be political cults, they can be personality cults, which I would argue is probably more so what this book is, and I might have looked at it in a different light going into it knowing that, but at the time I kind of was thinking it was more religion-based. I've already kind of stated a general idea of what this book is about, but we also have a perspective of the cult leader in this as well. And so I thought that was interesting as well, because we get an idea of like how this leader came to be where they were and why they think the work that they're doing is so important. And so that aspect I thought was really well done. I also had kind of high expectations because Stephanie Roble she did Darlene Rose, I think it was, which is also about kind of a true crime incident. So I have a feeling that this author enjoys things that pertain to true crime, and so I thought that she would really do this justice. I will say there are no religious aspects in this book at all. None at all. So there's also no sex. If there's someone who is going into this wondering if it was going to have strong aspects of that, it doesn't. However, self-harm is a massive part of this, and extreme stunts, I guess, are a massive part of this as well, so just be warned. So I am not quite halfway, but more than a quarter of the way through This Might Hurt, and my initial thoughts and feelings are, one, I'm a bit confused. I am listening to the audio. I'm gonna skim through the parts that I already read, because I think I've gotten my people a little mixed up, but I can't tell if that's intentional or if it was me. It could be me. It's probably me. So yeah, but I don't think it's super important necessarily right at this moment if I've mixed them up, so I'm not too super concerned about it. I do think that you can tell that this author has researched, at least to some degree, into cults. So there is, like, immediately within one of the first few chapters, it talks about, was it toilet paper? Like the amount of toilet paper that you can use, I think, was one of the things said. Actually, I wonder if that comes directly from, there was an interview with an ex-family member of the Children of God who talked about how they were told how many pieces of toilet paper that they had to use, and they couldn't use any more than that because it was considered a waste of, like, resources towards God. So I wonder if that was, like, kind of like a direct pull, or if it was just coincidental, because there are, like, the whole thing with cults is that it's all about control, and they basically say that you can't enjoy, like, the finer things, amount of food, and it usually has to be pretty bland food at that, and it's kind of described in here as well. So there is that, and it would pull directly from cult cultures, and also the kind of indoctrine of what's good behavior, what's bad behavior, and earning just, like, doing normal things within your life. Because I didn't realize that this is told in 2 different timelines, I believe. So we're following in the present time, where the one sister has gone to this facility, to this getaway to find her sister, and then we also are looking back as these children are being raised in a very authoritative household. Their father is manipulatively abusive and makes them earn, like, these point systems in order to even go to bed at night. And if they don't get to the point system, he makes them do some sort of task to make up for these points. But these tasks are not just, like, cleaning and things like that. They're, like, a bit extreme. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm intrigued so far. Especially since we've just gotten to the facility, I'm interested to see how much of that is mirrored in the things that I know about cults. But it does seem like the author is pulling a good amount of inspiration from other stories. I also love that the one child is obsessed with magic tricks, and especially Houdini, because, you know, Houdini was famous for getting out of unescapable places. It seems just like a really good icon for a child to be obsessed with, who is in kind of an unescapable situation. So, yeah, that's where we're at with that. I have some vlog clips. I honestly don't know where my vlog clips ended there, so I'm going to give you my overall thoughts and feelings, and I am going to give this book, I think, like a 3.5. I think that the overall way of which it presented the cult was actually done quite well, because I think it hits all the characteristics of a cult, We have the charismatic leader, and we have how that charismatic leader got to where they were and how they do so well at it. We have a targeted group, people who are down on their luck, looking for purpose. They even get like this trial period. Basically, they go and they kind of see what it's like, and they get the general basis, and everyone's so welcoming and lovely. And yeah, then we also get like that step-by-step guide. They are told exactly what they need to do in order to rise up. And we see how quickly that can really pull people in. We have unorthodox ideologies. This one isn't so much weird and out there as I think one would think, but I think it works because it is something so many people could get onto, because it's not religion-based. It's just basically like, I want my life to have purpose, and I want to know what that purpose is, and I want to love myself and really feel alive. So I think a lot of people would be able to relate to that. And again, it is very much targeting people who want to change something in their life. It's separated from the rest of the world. I mean, it's on a whole fucking island, and they're not allowed to have contact with anyone outside of the island. And so, you know, we do have that little bit, and then the extreme commitment, as we see later on, and what that leads to and how severe and devastating that can be. So I actually didn't care so much for the sisters' points of views. I'm just gonna be honest. They were kind of whatever. They were fine. It was interesting to see what was happening at the island. But overall, I just thought they were kind of uninteresting. They were kind of boring and bland compared to everything else that was happening. And I was like, okay, but give me something else to work with. Like, these are just people who are showing up and doing what they're told. I also thought that this tried to do some sort of weird, secretive type device that I didn't really care. It just confused me more than anything. It wasn't, I think it was supposed to work as like a plot twist, but like, honestly, I was kind of just like, okay, well, anyway. Like, why did I have to go so long wondering? The authoritative nature of which someone can grow up in and then take that a totally different way and kind of do the same thing to someone else. And how extreme some of these situations can be that put these people in these places. But I think, too, sometimes the storytelling overall was a bit convenient, and there were times where I thought it was trying to be a bit of a thriller, but it didn't really work so well. But there was just a lot of things that kind of lined up that I felt like wouldn't actually line up in like a real world case. So I don't know, it just seemed like a bit of a leap at times. So I did enjoy the story overall. I was kind of flying through it. I wanted to know how it was going to end in the ending. I will say, it's pretty great. The ending is pretty good. I thought the ending was pretty well done. It's just kind of like everything else that had happened up to that point it was entertaining. It was fascinating to read from. And I enjoyed kind of the process of how we got there. It's just that a lot of things just lined up a little too well for me. And I just didn't find all the characters as interesting as I thought I would. So did this live up to the expectations of a cult book? Kind of. It has all the cult characteristics, but I just don't think it is something that I would think about when I think of a cult. And maybe that's why it works, because there are so many present day things that I think we don't realize might be cults and are in the long term. I'm not getting into that. But I think that it hits all the characteristics. As for what I was looking for, I don't think it is quite on par exactly with what I was thinking. I tend to think that cults are a little more traumatic, and I think this was trying to just be more thrilling and not quite cross that line into that territory. But I do think that they are, and that they tend to be a little more severe. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I've only looked at severe cults. Maybe there's ones that are like this, that it's not as intense. I don't know. So I don't know if anyone who knows that much about cults would look at this and enjoy it. This is definitely for someone who just knows a little bit about cults and is slightly intrigued by them. This would probably work. And also for anyone who just enjoys like a mystery thriller type deal, probably this one. Not as dark, I think, as I was expecting a cult book to be. That is it. I did a lot of talking, and I probably could have done more, honestly. I actually came across this like a PowerPoint presentation by someone. I don't know. This is actually where I got most of the characteristics of a cult. And also just some of the other things, other like different properties of a cult and things like that. I'm gonna link it down below for anyone who's interested as well. So that's it. I would love to know what other books that you would recommend that have cults in them. I would consider Catherine House, The Secret History, probably all have a cult factor in them. So if you, secret societies, I think often fall into the cult category as well. But if you know of any, especially that are like big, massive member cults, I would love to know, because I feel like they're not, there's not as many as I thought there was. Maybe I have to go searching a little bit more. Nonfiction recommendations, because I've just seen so many that are kind of like, they don't have great reviews. So I would love any really great nonfiction recommendations or fiction. I would love fiction recommendations because they're just fun. What people can imagine apparently isn't as bad as it really is, but I would love to see what people can imagine and what they think is worth having a cult following behind. So yeah, that is a little bit more serious in nature. This is just more of like me sharing the knowledge of which I have and the weird things that I enjoy learning about, apparently. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to see future videos from me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!